And the monarchy is all about the people, isn't it? Which works well when you have someone like the late Queen Elizabeth II on the throne, a woman who just spent her whole life devoted to service and to duty. But you can play a mind experiment, can't you? Thinking, what if Andrew had been born first? How much of a disaster would that have been for the monarchy?
What a tumultuous 24 hours for Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor and for the British monarchy and for Britain, really, in terms of, how we are viewed. Because yesterday, on his 66th birthday, oh, what a present, Andrew became the first senior member of the royal family to be arrested for more than 350 years, sparking the biggest crisis for the monarchy since the abdication of Edward VIII back in 1936. And we heard Ed Vasey doing some very interesting chat about his abdication in his show. Now, the former prince was arrested on suspicion of misconduct in public office and was held for more than 11 hours until he was released under investigation at around 7 o'clock last night. And of course, as I mentioned, there was that very striking photograph of him in the back seat being driven away. And that is on pretty much every newspaper around the world today. Now, today, unmarked police vehicles have been arriving at Royal Lodge in Windsor as the search of Andrew's former home continues. Now, Andrew has previously denied any wrongdoing. Well, I'm now joined by the former royal correspondent for The Times, Valentine Low. Hello, Valentine.
Hello, Ayesha.
So how seismic is this moment for the British monarchy?
It's incredibly damaging because, for instance, yesterday when both the King and the Queen were out and about carrying out engagements, can anyone name what those engagements were and what they were doing? No, because what we were all talking about was Andrew. It's a huge distraction. And if you look at the statement the King released yesterday, it was very striking, wasn't it, about how he was talking about this person, Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, almost as if he wasn't related to him. And as one newspaper today described it as, this was the King trying to separate the man from the monarchy. I mean, and you've got to say, well, brave effort, Your Majesty, but I'm not sure it's going to work because people don't separate the man from the monarchy. They see the two as very much entangled, entwined. And the monarchy is all about the people, isn't it? Which works well when you have someone like the late Queen Elizabeth II on the throne, a woman who just spent her whole life devoted to service and to duty. But you can play a mind experiment, can't you? Thinking, what if Andrew had been born first? How much of a disaster would that have been for the monarchy? So you can't separate people from the monarchy, and it's going to be extremely damaging for them. I do, however, think, and it's also damaging because there are so many more questions still to ask. People have been asking, what did the people in the palace, both officials and members of the royal family, what did they know about what was going on when Andrew was trade envoy? And those questions will be continue to be asked right up until any court case, should there be a court case. But I do think that in the long term, 10 years down the line, it will probably be seen as an Andrew problem rather than a monarchy problem. I think if the King and then later William, when he accedes to the throne, if they show themselves as being, in the mould of the late Queen, devoted to duty and service, the monarchy will survive. But I don't say that with huge confidence.
I mean, it does feel like it's a big moment. I mean, that picture of, as well, that very arresting, that optic of Andrew in the car, has obviously gone around the world. I mean, it does. I mean, I sort of feel the idea that this is the end of the monarchy feels a bit far-fetched, but it does feel like the kind of bubble has burst a bit. And I think, as you say, quite a lot of that was the passing of the late Queen, because she was such a special individual, and just her span of her sweep of history just being this golden thread through so many decades of history. She was in a kind of quite a unique figure. But now it does feel like the monarchy is looking more ordinary and more susceptible to scandals. I mean, how do you think not just Charles, but also William tried to navigate this? Because everywhere they go for the foreseeable future, these questions are going to be shouted out at them. They are going to potentially get heckled. It's quite difficult to sort of send the message out that we're special and different when this case is rumbling on.
Yeah, it's extremely difficult, and there are two threads to this, aren't there? Because there's how the media treats them, and there have been discussions about is the age of deference over? Has the media been guilty of perhaps a somewhat fawning attitude towards the monarchy? But also there's how politicians treat them, and we saw this last autumn when there was a huge debate about, and should Andrew be stripped of all his titles? And eventually the king did release that statement. And politicians were talking about the monarchy in the way they don't normally do. They normally are very unwilling to take on the monarchy, and that wasn't the case last autumn. And it's hard to tell whether that new attitude will stick or whether people will revert to their former forms of behaviour. But it's easy to detect a change in attitude towards the monarchy, that where it's more acceptable to be very critical.
I've recorded an interview with Stephen Flynn, who is an ardent Republican, that will play that at just after 2:00. And just to ask you, Valentine, is that, you're a very well-respected royal correspondent, and I heard another royal correspondent this morning saying that royal correspondents in the media have been too deferential and too timid with the royal family. I mean, he cited examples of, whenever big interviews had been done, the terms of trade were very strict in terms of you couldn't ask William about previous girlfriends, you couldn't ask Harry about the Nazi outfit, all of that type of thing. What do you think as a royal correspondent? Do you agree with that?
I think there's an element of truth in that. I mean, I found out myself. I was once offered an interview with Andrew to talk about some charitable exploit he's going to do. He's going to abseil down the Shard. And this was after the Epstein story surfaced. And it was quite plain that I would not be able to ask questions about Epstein, much to my frustration. And perhaps, there's a bit of a mea culpa here. Perhaps I should have made clear in the article that I wrote that that was the condition of the interview. So yes, but also newspapers, this country's newspapers, have on occasion been very critical of the monarchy. So I don't think it's a charge that fully sticks. I think I've certainly written many articles myself, as have all my colleagues, which question aspects of the monarchy, whether it's Andrew's behaviour, whether it's the financial arrangements, whether even it's Charles's behaviour as Prince of Wales. So I don't think we are all complete fawning lickspittles, but there are elements of truth in that.
And in terms of what happens next, and obviously there's very much probably going to be a long way to go with this investigation, but if the former prince is charged and it goes to trial, obviously it'll be a huge case. Who will pay for the former prince's legal fees, and who might represent him? Is that something that the taxpayer would cover, or would that come out of royal money? Was that something that the king would have to sign off and give Andrew a budget for legal fees? How would that work?
Short answer is I don't know, except I can say with absolute certainty the taxpayer will not be paying for it unless he can somehow apply for legal aid, which he cannot. I would have thought that probably the king would pay for it out of his own private money.
But then the question is, do you think the king will get him the best brief that money could buy, or just give him somebody a bit shonky and a bit cheaper?
Just get the duty solicitor to represent him.
But seriously, because that will be a big, that will be a big moment. And if the king spends a vast amount of money on this, sure, and hires like the best lawyer going, I mean, questions, eyebrows will be raised at that.
Yeah, I'm sure Andrew will be given the best legal representation that Charles's money will buy, and people might raise eyebrows at it, but he deserves to have his case put in court.
And if this does go to trial, I mean, how it will be an absolute global media circus. I mean, how damaging will that be to the royal family?
Massively damaging. And the interesting question will be, as I and others have said, what do the royal family know? I suspect it'll turn out they knew little. Andrew very much operated in a silo.
I mean, it's worth saying that Andrew, of course, denies any wrongdoing, but obviously we'll have to see what happens with this case. But goodness, I mean, it's an extraordinary story. Valentine, really good to speak with you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
That's the former royal correspondent for The Times, Valentine Low there.